Hello, how are you doing? Last night I watched the first parts of the Caribbean film because I'm planning to go through them all. Have a bit of a binge. So I'd like to do one a day if I can, so hopefully life doesn't get in the way. But I watched the first one last night and I would just love to talk about it because it's such a brilliant film. There's so much to like. And the tone of the film. It's the first one, but they just nail the tone of it from the moment it starts, with the introduction of Elizabeth and Will, the comedic elements in there when Will breaks the candle in the mansion. It's just gorgeous. It's so subtle but so funny. Yeah, I love their character introductions. But as far as introductions go, we obviously can't beat that of Jack Sparrow. Sorry, Captain Jack Sparrow. Because, let's start by talking about his theme. Because Hans Zimmer worked his magic with this one. It's just perfect. It's comedic. It fits the drunken mannerisms of Jack. And obviously it's iconic, and then it builds to this epic soundscape and orchestral swirling and stabs. It's absolutely fantastic. But in this entry, it's quite comedic, and it just perfectly fits with his actions and the direction and the way they reveal the sinking boat as he just steps onto the docks. It's absolutely brilliant. And of course, Johnny Depp is beautiful and sublime and every other superlative there is. His character is just nailed, as I say, from the moment he's on screen. And the praise goes to the writing as well in that regard, because they just nailed it. And other comedic elements I have to talk about are maybe understated, but they are the two pirate comedy duo played by Lee Arenberg and Mackenzie Crook, who are fantastic actors. And again, it's quite subtle, and they don't always have the most frequent of times to shine, but when they do, they steal the show. And on the human side of things, you kind of have the human equivalent of the two guards, who are played by Giles New and Angus Barnett. They're just brilliant, and they complement Jack so well as well, and he's rolling his eyes as they're discussing the Black Pearl for the first time. It's absolutely brilliant. Talking of the Pearl, I absolutely love how they build up to it. It really makes it feel significant, and obviously it's called The Curse of the Black Pearl, so you know it's going to be significant, but it's not just significant because it's the biggest ship or it's the fastest ship. It's because of the captain and all of the stories that we hear about it before we actually see it. That's why it's brilliant, and why it's just scary, really. And then it finally gets revealed, but not just by showing us the ship. It gets revealed by the gunfire, which I think is genius, and the way Jack recognizes the guns in the prison cell. It's just fantastic. And hints towards the past of Jack as well, I think. And one thing I noticed about this film, I kind of watched them all quite recently, but they were quite far away from each other, so I wanted to watch through them again a bit more frequently and just go from one to the next. One thing I noticed going back to this first film was how before we learn of Jack to be the lovable comedic character that we now know him as, he can be quite scary in this one. He's threatening lots of people. and he feels like much more of a real pirate than the kind of in-between character that he kind of develops into the more we learn about him. But he can be really quite scary, I think, and that just goes to show Johnny Depp's brilliance again, because he really contrasts his performance as well, and there are scenes that are so serious that I don't think we see again for the remaining films, but they're absolutely brilliant. And then we move on to Barbossa, played of course by the legendary Geoffrey Rush, who I probably saw first in this film, but I think I was probably too young to realise it was him. So when I first became obsessed with Geoffrey Rush was from his motion picture Shine. I just thought he was absolutely genius in that. And also, speaking of this kind of same scene where we introduce the Pearl and Barbossa, the direction I have to also praise, because as Elizabeth is in the boat and they're rowing up to the Pearl, there's a camera shot looking up at the ship, and I just think that's so perfect and clever, because it shows the scale of the set and the magnificence of what they've built. Because a lot of these films are practical. They built the ships. And the most CGI thing is usually the ocean. But, all the extras are mostly there. The ships are all real, the sets are all real, all the action sequences are actually happening. And I think it's a really beautiful way of showing off what they've created by having that shot of looking up and seeing the Pearl from Elizabeth's perspective. And then, moving on slightly, we start to develop the plot a bit more when Jack and Gibbs are at the bar discussing how they're going to capture the Pearl and using Will as leverage. But again, it's kind of, some things are kept secret, obviously, because they don't want to give us the whole plot in that one scene. But it reveals just enough to keep you interested, and the pacing of it is so good, because there's so much to balance in this film. There are the action sequences, there are the comedy elements, and then obviously there's the serious stuff and the storyline. And this one scene between them is quite long, which, credit to the actors again, that they really pull it off, and with two lesser actors it might not have worked so well, but the dialogue is wonderful, and it just moves the story along at such a perfect pace. And of course emphasizes Will's importance as well. And then this kind of continues along when Barbossa explains the curse to Elizabeth. And this is one of my favourite scenes, because Geoffrey Rush delivers this monologue just so beautifully. I'm so glad they got him to do this film. He is perfect for the role, and I feel like he had great fun with it. It feels like he's been wanting to be a pirate all his life and was never asked, and now they've asked him. Now that he's in the latter stages of his career, and he can just relax, let his hair down and go wild with it, and I'm so glad he did, because no one else could have done it better, I don't think. And also, one point about this scene, I watched this on DVD, which obviously has the bonus features and commentaries from the cast and crew. You watch along with them as they tell you about how it was to make it. And I'm pretty sure I remember them saying that this was one of the first scenes they filmed, or at least one of the first ones that Geoffrey Rush filmed. And there was this long monologue that was so important to the story, and the character had to be absolutely nailed by this point, but it was one of the first scenes they filmed. So, to do that so early on in the shoot is even more incredible. So, hats off to Geoffrey Rush for that, because it was incredible work. And then, of course, once the curse has been explained, we get the reveal of the skeleton pirate. which I have to say look absolutely great, even now. I think this was released in 2003, but the effects and the CGI holds up. It's perfect. I think they may have been restricted by what they could do, but what ended up in the film looked absolutely brilliant. And I remember watching shots from the later films where I thought, oh, the effects, the imagery looks a bit off there. I didn't get that once in this film. So credit to the effects team and the crew involved in that, because it looks absolutely brilliant and it holds up today, 2 decades later. I can't believe it's been 2 decades, but it has. But you could not tell watching the film. And then moving on a bit more towards the latter stages of the film, where they capture Elizabeth and they're about to use her blood to break the curse. When Barbossa does his speech to his crew, and he's on this mountain of treasure, the extras, I realised this watching the DVD commentary, the extras are all brilliant. Like, every crew member has a distinct feature about them, and it's not just in their outfits or their appearance, it's in their performance. And I feel like even the ones in the background, they're always doing something, they're never not acting. And it sounds so obvious, but in so many films, the extras can just be lost and be there to fill up the numbers. But they're really not in this film. You really feel like every character has a background and a history. So credit to all the extras who clearly poured their heart and soul into this, because it really shows, and the picture is all the better for it. And then towards the end of the film, we have a huge action scene with the skeleton pirates. And I have to credit the action scenes in this, because it's not always... I struggle with action films in general. Like, after a while, the novelty of big explosions and lots of guns just wears off on me, and I'm not... It doesn't interest me, it doesn't excite me. If it's used sparingly, then I'm fine with it, but a full-on action film, I just struggle with when most of it is stunts and, fights. But the action scenes in this, I absolutely love, because it's never just sword fighting. There are always funny little details, or a character doing something in the background that just catches your eye, and you think, that's hilarious, or that's genius. Otherwise, there's always a point to it, and there's always a main character do something, or there's a point to the fight that has a significant effect on the plot that has to happen for the story to move forward. So that's just... Oh yeah, I just wanted to mention that, because usually I'm not a fan of action scenes, but I realised watching it that the action scenes are brilliantly done in this. And then, of course, we end with Barbossa's death, which this scene is a masterclass in television. The acting, the music, the direction, and just the story. It's the perfect climax of the film. The slow reveal of Will having given his blood, it not being apparent at first, and us thinking that Jack's wasted his one shot. It's just fantastic, and the cold stare that Jack gives Barbossa, it's piercing, and it's one of those looks that I think shows his darker side, that I think is lost in later films, but it was absolutely sublime in this film. And of course Geoffrey Rush, whose reaction, he just says, I feel, and there's a long pause, and he just says, old, at the end, before dying. His performance is just so perfect. I'm sorry to keep banging on about it, but if I wasn't to, then it wouldn't be doing him justice, because it's so perfect, and I just love this scene. It was one of my favourite scenes. And then everyone drops their swords and surrenders, before moving into the final scenes, where Will's and Elizabeth's love story comes to a conclusion, and By the way, in that scene where they're talking about what to do with Jack, he is upstaging everyone. He doesn't say a single line until the latter part of the scene. But while everyone else is speaking, he's just always doing these funny little mannerisms and looking at a character in the background or an extra or just doing something that's always funny, and the camera just has to include him. There are so many wide shots because they couldn't not show Jack because he's just always doing something that's upstaging everyone else. But yeah, and then that's pretty much the end of the motion picture, and those are all the reasons I love it. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the film and enjoyed me talking about it, because I love talking about it, and I look forward to watching the remaining 4 and talking about those, because I could go on forever. I feel like it's such a brilliant series. So yeah, I'll speak to you soon to talk about the next one. Be well.